Okay, it says we're live. Hello, everyone. Hello, hello. It's Tuesday. It's 4 o'clock Pacific, 7 o'clock Eastern, 1 a.m. here in Italy, 8:30 a.m. on the west coast of Australia, Wednesday morning. I think it's 9:30 a.m. on the east coast of Australia. And I know you guys will tell me if I got that right. And it's Facebook Live. Hello, hello. We have a very special guest today, Jennifer Maynard, who is the CEO of, Jennifer, is it the Human Longevity? Is that correct?
It's Nutrition for Longevity.
Nutrition for Longevity. Thank you. And I'm really excited to get into Jennifer's field of interest, primarily because of a podcast I heard over this last summer. My friend Mark Hyman did a podcast, and he was talking to an expert about what's happening on the planet now. And they talked about how can we save the planet? And the technology is already available. And I was shocked to hear this, and I had no idea about this until I heard the interview, and then I met Jennifer after that. And what is that? It's regenerative agriculture. So I just want to do the deep dive and go right in. So Jennifer, can you tell us what is regenerative agriculture?
So regenerative agriculture focuses on essentially rebuilding the soil. And this is really important because we've lost about 2/3 of our carbon stores in our soil over the last mainly 30 years. So a lot of environmentalists, and now there's an overwhelming body of evidence showing that it is the number one thing that we could focus on that's the lowest cost and the most effective thing to start reversing climate change. So we hear about focusing on solar power, which is important, but it'll take us over 100 years to start reversing climate change with solar power alone. Whereas if we focus on agriculture, we can already start shifting the needle right away. So it's a huge passion of mine because for a lot of reasons. One is if you collectively look at all of the aspects of regenerative farming, it is the number one reason. There's about 30 different points that can help regenerate the environment and help start reversing climate change. One is composting. So it's one thing that we focus on very heavily on our farm. 3 different types of composting. So it's a very delicate balance. People can do it in their backyard, but from a large scale farming standpoint, it's definitely a science, and we're very particular on which type of methods and technologies we use to build up. Yeah, go ahead.
May I back up?
Yeah,
because
sorry.
Probably most of our listeners don't know what regenerative agriculture is. So
Yes.
As I understand it, and please, I know you'll fine tune this,
Yeah.
but just like in our guts, we know that it's the microbiome, and the geek term is modulates, which means has its hands on the steering wheel of where the car's going, that the microbiome in the gut modulates the function in our body, especially in our brain. And there's hundreds and hundreds of studies on that, how important to have the good bacteria in our gut. It's the same thing with the soil.
Yes. So
and as I understand it, as you said, in the last 30 years, we've been killing off the soil, converting the soil to dirt.
yes.
And food doesn't grow in dirt.
Yeah.
It will only grow in soil.
Yes. Yeah.
Please.
Yeah, so that's a lot of the different aspects. So there's the composting. Everything's about building up diversity back into the soil and building soil organic matter, which is essentially building a sponge in the soil that can hold the bacteria, it can retain water and create this incredible environment. And it is very much like the gut microbiome. So the soil microbiome has so many similarities. And even some of the things that they believe are starting to impact the human gut microbiome are the same exact things that are impacting the soil microbiome. So we have a lack of diversity in the foods that we grow through monocropping. So because like you said, plants actually self-select some of their microbiome, and they do that based on what is around them. And so if you're only growing one crop, you're not creating diversity in the soil for plants to thrive. And similar to the gut microbiome, it actually does impact even genetic expression. And so they're even saying we probably missed the mark by focusing science so heavily on like GMO crops because we genetically modified them in an exact specific way, but we wiped out the genetic diversity of the soil microbiome, which actually allows this genetic elasticity to occur. So for example, if a drought occurs, a plant used to be able to pull upon their microbiome around them, and it would actually tell the plant, send out lateral roots, send out finer root fibers so you can pull in more water to the plant. That's a form of genetic expression for a plant. So we've essentially wiped out also the plant's stress coping mechanisms, which is what we're doing to the human gut microbiome as well. So there's so many similarities. It's just incredible.
Well, that's remarkable, you know, that I didn't know that the microbiome of the soil will tell the plant, you need more hoses out there. Go get some more water, right?
Yeah.
You know, and then
Yeah.
and then the plant will send roots out further. And that our own microbiome is the same way, in that it's always adapting to the environment that we create down there, and adapting, making adjustments, telling the brain to make more neurotransmitters, make less neurotransmitters, the hormones in the brain, adjust that the amount of neurotransmitters in our brain are controlled by the bacteria in our gut.
Yes.
And so it's the same thing in the soil, you're saying, with the plants. Now, here's a question I have for you. I've heard from the announcement by the World Health Organization, I think it was 3 or 4 years ago, that there are only 60 growing cycles left. And I'm wondering if you can talk about that for a minute. What are they talking about?
Yeah, so they're just talking about, we've essentially, for a lot of modern farming, we are essentially removing the soil and we are just having remaining dirt, which means it can't retain water. If you, and this isn't an entirely new thing. We've actually, unfortunately, kind of stripped the land in the U.S. almost from the very beginning, where we started colonizing this country as a population, and that started with the railroad companies essentially providing cheap land, and so we never really appreciated the land, and so we've been stripping it. The Dust Bowl, that actually was already the starting contribution of stripping our land. It's just gotten much worse. So we till the land, that breaks up the soil organic matter, that strips the surface level of the soil, and we're doing it at such an intensive rate, and we're essentially we know about 10% of what is going on under the surface, and we're already eradicating entire species of bacteria that we don't know the health benefits of that. And we're doing that at a rapid rate, from monocropping, from the chemicals we use, from tillage. And they are saying if we don't start basically turning this around, we will have zero fertility left in the soil, we'll have zero topsoil, and we won't have any nutrients for the plants. So a lot of the practices we use today are just Band-Aids. They're not fixing it. And it started, like I said, back in the 30s. We were already depleting the soil, and the solution over a 20-year period was add chemicals. That's the solution. We had a lot of chemicals left after World War II, and they thought, we have all this ammonia, what can we do with it? Let's convert it to nitrogen fertilizers. And so when that happened, it just completely accelerated this use and overuse of our soils.
Wow, you know, I've never thought about this before, but the Dust Bowl that I heard about in the 1930s, the Dust Bowl is like a newborn baby that, because of one reason or another, has to be born by C-section. So a C-section baby doesn't come through the birth canal of mom and get inoculated with all that good bacteria. And we now know the impact for that baby for their entire life. Much higher incidence of asthma and allergies and skin problems and eczema, because they never got the normal microbiome in their soil, that in their gut, that they were to have. And it's the same thing for the soil. What you're saying, it's the same for the soil.
Yes.
Now, I'm going to take a moment here and just say hello to Mia's here from North Wales. Hi, Mia. Tracy's from South Carolina. Doug's here from Cleveland. Dawn was the first one on to say hello. Hi, Dawn. Tracy's here, South Carolina once again. And Jennifer's here from Maine. Tracy said, great article about this on foodtank.com. Thanks, Jennifer, for people that want to hear more after we're done. Steph from Missouri, Claudine from Carlisle, Cindy's in Pennsylvania, Wanda's in Long Island, Gabriella's in Peru, South Peru. Hi, Gabriella. Thank you so much for joining. Cindy's here. Nellie's from the Netherlands. Trang Phan's here. Tracy Holcamp, and Dirt to Soul by Gabe Brown is a book that Tracy's recommending. And it goes on and on. I'll say hello to more people. But like always, I love to see your hearts and your thumbs ups coming flying across the screen. Thank you. It's always a blast to see that. So Jennifer, let's go into a little more about the depletion of the soil and some of the habits, just for another minute or two, so people have the background, and then we'll talk about the regenerative aspect of all this.
Okay. Yeah. So again, regenerative farming then is doing the opposite. So we don't use tillage. We focus on composting, which is bringing back to the environment. We focus on a diversity of plants so we can regenerate that biodiversity in the soil. We focus on animal integration. So we don't eat the animals on our farm, but they are an important part of breaking down and creating that natural cycle of the environment. And then once we lay our beds, we do bed rows for our farming, even though it's a large farm, everything's bed rows. We never move those again. And we kind of mimic Mother Nature in the sense that we always keep the ground covered. So if you go into most different types of soil or geographies in anywhere in the world, most places the ground is always covered if you leave it alone. So Mother Nature naturally knows to protect the soil. So there's either leaf litter coverage, there's what we call weeds that grow up. That's what you want on a farm to protect your soil, to keep the moisture in and to build a thriving microbiome. So that's what we focus on our farm. And that's what regenerative farming essentially is how do you bring that microbiome back? And it takes time. We use a method called Johnson-Su bioreactors. It sounds super sophisticated, but it's just a type of composting where you basically kind of let this pile of compost in a tube cook. We say it's cooking for almost a year. And what it's really doing is it's building up a very high concentration of fungus. And fungus is the number one thing that really helps you build up your soil microbiome, because it creates these incredible threads. It looks like our neural network of the human body. They consider it pretty much the same neural network that we have in the human body in the soil. And it's sending messages, and it's allowing the bacteria in the soil to communicate with the plant. And they've found neural networks of this fungus that are miles long. It's an incredible element of the soil microbiome. So it allows us to build up this really high concentration of fungus that then we can inoculate the rest of our farm with. So it's kind of a super inoculant.
So I have a question for you on that. Did you see the movie Avatar?
Yes.
And in that movie, I mean, that's a little bit of Hollywood, but is that concept true on a farm, that underground the roots and the plants are talking to each other?
Yes, absolutely. They've already done studies to show that if there's a certain pest that starts attacking a plant that's maybe 2 rows down or a row down, it's already sending signals for the other plants to start creating phytonutrients to protect that plant from that insect. Same with, like I said, drought. And the other thing that's incredible, you brought up children that are born through a C-section. Well, plants also pass down a good portion of their microbiome in their seed. So when we start modifying those seeds and playing with those seeds, we lose a lot of that genetic diversity that may have been passed down hundreds of generations, because obviously plants were here a lot earlier than human beings were. So when we disrupt that, it's really hard to get it back, and it takes a lot of work.
Wow, that's what's, and I want everyone to know that although this may sound kind of geeky, actually it is very geeky, what we're talking about so far. We're going to talk about what can you do, whether you live on a farm or you live in an apartment in New York City. What can you do that will help? So, we're going to give you the background information first. A couple more shout outs. Laura's here. Hi, Laura. Laura's in Oregon. Laura's part of our team at theDr.com. Debbie's here from San Jose. Cindy says, so much growing soil today is depleted of the important goodies we need for healthy plant growth. Amen to that. And we're going to talk about what we can do as individuals for that.
Mhm.
Jillian's here from Cleveland. Marnie's here from New Mexico. Joyce is here from Portland. Antoinette's here from Ellsworth, Maine. Nancy's in Northville, Michigan. Hey, Nancy. I grew up at 8 Mile and Evergreen in Detroit, so I know right where you are in Northville. Yvonne's here from Northern California, and the list goes on and on once again. And I'm going to do something here I've never done before. And Gabriela, this is for you. Gabriela's in Peru, and she said, she wrote a message and said, amazing information. Thanks for sharing. God bless you, Dr. Tom. You are a blessing in my life. Since I discovered about the microbiome, gluten, and so on, there is a before and after in my life and my family as well. Thanks so much for all that you do. Well, thank you, Gabriela. And I'm going to say to you, it's your job to pay it forward, you know, to tell the world about this and tell the world about our Facebook Live every Tuesday at 4 o'clock Pacific, because I think you're the only person from Peru. You know, we have people from Cambodia and other places in South America, but let's get a whole tribe here from Peru. And I guess they'll have to speak English, but thank you so much for your kind words. Moving forward, Jennifer, let's talk a little specific about your farm, because your farm is so remarkable what you're doing. And it actually is an example of how we can help humanity and the produce you're producing. So let's just talk about it and where the farm is going in the future.
Yes. Okay. So one of the things is also we're trying to also help people reconnect with their food. So it's really important to, like, I even tell people, like you talked about something simple people can do. If you can literally just grow a tomato plant on your porch, that is a really important thing, because they're even saying your interaction with that soil is also building potentially your biodiversity of your, well, not even just your microbiome, but your holobiome, right? Everything that collectively is all your bacteria and protozoa and everything that makes up your collective DNA. And just connecting with your food and understanding and appreciating where it comes from is really important. We've completely disconnected ourselves from our food. And, you know, I've talked to some other doctors before that they've likened also the soil microbiome to, as I mentioned, plants self-select some of their bacteria and what they need to survive. So their stress coping mechanism is partly also bringing that diversity pool into their own system. And we are so disconnected from our food. When you're under stress, for example, you may only go after certain colored foods, like bright colored blue foods, red foods, and those are common with phytonutrients. And so I believe the human body used to be able to know what it needed, but we've completely disconnected with food, with artificial colors, all the artificial flavoring, just the manipulation of our food system, that I don't think our bodies know now what exactly they need. We have to retrain it. So that's another aspect of us, is we trying to get people more connected to their food again, more connected to how their food is grown, go outside, touch nature, get involved with the soil microbiome, but also be very conscious of the food that you select and kind of start retraining your body and smelling that food and touching that food, because it's a really important part that I believe we've completely lost. That's really important for a healthy body. So that's what our farms are. Partly we use them for education. We obviously use them. We're expanding into some additional locations later this year. So we have regional farms, region for region. And then last year we launched a meal kitting company to start preparing this food so we can get it to people across the US. And that's been another passion of mine, is finding a way to combine this food in the right way. And we use the longevity diet, which was written by Dr. Valter Longo, as the foundation of our meals. And so that's kind of step 2 of our overall plan for the regenerative farming.
Well, I'm going to ask you for a minute. We'll elaborate on the longevity diet, but beforehand, a question came in from Gwendolyn. She said, we have no selenium in our soil in New Zealand. How best to replace it?
There's a few. I mean, if your soil is missing certain nutrients, they do say that you can supplement that, but most regenerative farmers actually say you have to start focusing on the microbiome, and they start pulling that out of the soil. Most of our soil actually has reserves of most of these minerals, even if it's deep within the soil. And so what we actually on our farm try to not use any amendments. And we do that for several years. It takes time. So some farms will start transitioning by supplementing with natural sources of selenium. But a lot of hardcore regenerative farmers, they really try to start having the microorganisms pull that out of the environment.
That's a great answer. I'm just imagining a guy that's got a business card, John Smith, hardcore regenerative farmer, right? So that's really great. It's like, I'm really serious about this, and it's going to take a little longer, but and that's true with our own guts and our own microbiome, and many of you have heard me talk often about in the steps in healing a gut, healing a leaky gut, which, by the way, I just got a new paper that came out recently by Professor Alessio Fasano from Harvard. And the paper is entitled, "All Disease Begins in the Gut." And I mean, that's a bold, bold statement now that one of our leading researchers has taken the position. And then the paper outlines all of those mechanisms. And I think the same thing happens with our soil, that we could say all diseases of the soil, or all loss of nutrient in the food, begins with depleted soil. Yeah. And so this whole concept that we're talking about today is really important. And as Jennifer was talking about growing a tomato plant, my thoughts have been in the past many times that we all can grow some spices on our windowsill. You can grow a little parsley, you can grow a little basil. I mean, things like that, just starting with little things, even for people that don't have a garden, there's no space for that. You can get some soil and you can grow a few little things in the windowsill. And that starts the whole process for you. And 3 years, 5 years from now, you or your children, now you've got a little piece of land in a community garden, and you found a place, and it's a community center, and you're growing some of your own food now there. But you start with the baby steps. And I'm hearing you, Jennifer, say that's how you start on the land. Is it may take a few years longer, but if your business card says hardcore, you understand, and you're going to go with the ways that work long term. So that's a great answer. Thank you for that. Another question came in. Would love to figure out how to grow food in the winter without a greenhouse. Yeah. I'd love to have a 57 Cadillac Barretts convertible. There's lots of things in life that we'd love to have, but that's a really good point. How do you grow food without a greenhouse in the winter?
So it depends. Yeah, I mean, it depends where you live. So I live in New Jersey. Our first farm's in New Jersey. We do grow some crops outdoors year round. They do take some special TLC. So a lot of root crops, rutabaga, carrots, radishes, parsnips, those actually can be grown most of the year, even in New Jersey. And we have a pretty extreme climate. Obviously not as much as some areas, but we get a lot of snow. And you can actually just cover some of those crops with straw as a protective layer. Even if they have snow on them, you can remove the snow, and a lot of those crops are still intact. So a lot of cabbages, kales, things like that. So there are a lot of winter hardy. If you're in California or Texas or any of the areas that are much warmer climates than we are in New Jersey, you can grow a lot more crops year round as well. We overwinter a lot of stuff in New Jersey. This year's been a little bit of a wacky year because we've had warm, cold, warm, cold. The crops don't love that, but so we'll sometimes have to cover them with a thermal blanket. But it depends really on your zone, but there's a lot of different areas across the United States that across the globe that you can grow stuff year round, even without a greenhouse.
Thank you. Marilyn's here from Newfoundland. Danuta's here from Poland. Danuta, it's the same time there as for me here in Milan. It's 1 a.m. Thank you so much for being up. And what are you doing up so late? So thank you for joining us, though. It's nice that you're here. Rosemarie's here. Colette's here from Scotland, from Glasgow. Scotland. Chris is here from Vancouver, Canada. It's so great to see people from all over the world. You know, it's really, and it just goes on and on. So thank you all. Thank you for being here. So let's talk a little about the vision of the farm. What's the big picture here, Jennifer, of what you're striving to do?
Yeah, so we're striving to really bring some of my business background and my passion for agriculture and start creating food models that we can show to the world. Organic regenerative farming can produce far more crops, because that's one of the things you always hear is organic farming can never feed the world. We waste in the US at least about 65% of our food. So about 35% we waste as consumers. About 30% is actually usually left after they harvest commercial crops. So for example, a tomato crop, they pick most tomatoes green and then they gas them later so they can transport them and they're kind of rock hard. So about 30% plus gets left in the field as the ripe tomatoes, which actually most people would want to turn into sauces and things like that. Those are all left behind. Watermelon's the highest. You can leave up to 75% of watermelons in a field because they're always looking for the perfect size, the perfect weight, the most beautiful looking food. So we could stop wasting. That's actually the number 3 thing on one of the largest global reports on environmental reversing climate change is stop wasting so much food, because we waste so much, especially in the US and certain parts of Europe.
Now, I'd say that this point that you just brought up is so important,
Yeah.
because of everyone who's listening to this here today and in the future for the replays. When you hear this and you think about wasting food, how much food do you throw out in your kitchen? And as you see this, I'm guilty of this, because what I love to do more than anything else in terms of spending money is I like to buy quality food.
Yeah.
I like going to farmers markets, and I like going to the organic produce section of the store and buy good produce, good food. And I don't eat it all. I travel so much that many times in the past, I'd have to throw out a bunch of stuff as I'm hurrying to pack my suitcase and get out the door, because it'll go rotten by the time I get back in 2 weeks. And I've learned to be more sensitive to my schedule before I go shopping. All right, I'm going to be here for 4 days. So, really? Oh, I can't buy that. I'm not going to be around to eat all of that. That's too bad. I'm starting to think more that way, and we all could do that. And that's a first step to saving the soil of the planet. And if you think of it that way, and if you teach your children about this and about meal planning or food for the day planning, we won't throw away so much as individuals. And that's a first step in this whole process.
Yeah. So yeah, one is not wasting as much food. The other is we spend over 75% of our farmland is for raising animals for food, whether it's grain for feed or actual livestock grazing. We don't really say you have to be vegan. We're very much flexitarian or reducitarian because we don't want to scare people away. But if you look at the longevity regions of the world, people eat a mainly plant-based diet. So if that's one of the 4th best things that we could do to start reversing climate change as well, is to start eating a more plant-based diet. And the amount that we could reverse as far as tons of atmospheric carbon is incredible if we started transitioning more of our farmland to producing healthy crops and a little bit less on livestock. And livestock or grazing animals are actually important for soil regeneration, but in a very controlled way and not so concentrated in feedlots and different things like that. So that's another thing that regenerative farming is really trying to focus on, is starting to educate people to shift the model to really focusing the little farmland we have left into highly fertile soil that's growing nutrient dense crops. And so we're creating a food model that shows that that's possible, that our yields are extremely high, that we can do it with no synthetic chemicals. And I say, people say, well, then what chemicals do you use? But plants create their own chemicals. So I never say no chemicals, because that's like non-existent in this world. But we don't spray our crops with anything. We try to really build up our native pollinator habitats. We try to build up hedgerows and things that, again, native species can protect the crops on their own. So certain beetles, for example, can consume up to 2,000 other beetles if they're the native ones that you want, and you can create a thriving environment for them to live. But it's becoming more and more of a challenge for farming because we've lost 80% of our insect biomass over the last 20 years. Like, a lot of people don't know that, but that's frightening if you think that at least a third of our food is pollinated by insects, and we're losing a lot of them. So we also on our farm focus very heavily on building up biodiversity for the insects and creating native habitats that support your native species. Because the one scary thing with the insects is, unfortunately, the invasive species are starting to really outnumber the natives. So we try to do everything we can to build up that population. So we try to do it without chemicals, and we're creating a food model that can be replicated in different regions in a very similar way, using no chemicals and getting extremely high yields.
Jennifer, let me ask this question as someone who's listening here today. What does that have to do with me? You know, that you're talking about your farm and what you're trying to do in the farm, which I support completely, and I think it's critically important. But for the average person who's listening, you know, they can't quite relate to, okay, how does this relate to me and my kids?
Yes. So, I mean, one of the things is knowing where your food comes from. So it's important if you care about the environment, if you care about clean food, it's important you start to understand where your food comes from. And it doesn't have to be that you're buying it from someone like me. It can be going to your farmer's market, talking to the farmers there, understanding and asking questions, and really seeing what they do. And they'll talk to you about it. They love it. If you're a farmer, you have to be passionate about it because it's not an easy job. So I think part of it is that food awareness and just becoming more aware again of where your food comes from. And the other is my belief of food as medicine. And I think that's where you and I kind of really connected with what can people do also to start improving their gut microbiome, to start improving a lot of, like you said, there's more and more studies coming out that a lot of diseases are starting from your gut, and they're really linking it to the health of your gut microbiome. And that's why we focus on soil. We believe that soil is really the root of healthy plants, and healthy plants are, in my opinion, the root to healthy living. So I think that's how I connect the two, and where I came from healthcare and focusing on medicine and healing people. But I shifted to food as medicine as my primary focus because I think it's the least tapped area of our healthcare system or our medical system this day and age. So that's what I would want people to think about, is how they can heal their bodies or prevent disease by eating a healthier diet.
Amen to that. Amen to that. And Yvonne made the comment, it's not just in the foods we eat that are affected by the soil, it's also the plants that create our medicine. Yes. And you're right, Yvonne, in terms of herbs and just the higher quality of if you eat commercially grown, I shouldn't say commercially, but non-organic blueberries compared to organic blueberries, you're still going to get benefit from them. If that's all that's available is the regular old blueberries, great, because blueberries do make a big change in brain function. Yep. 1 cup of blueberries a day for 3 years, and you reverse cognitive decline of up to 30. You're thinking like you were 13 years ago. Yeah. After 1 cup of blueberries a day. But organic blueberries cuts down that time to get those results because you got more nutrients, more polyphenols, more of the guts of the plant, if you will, that benefit us as humans. So this whole concept of where is your food coming from and eating more plants. Notice that Jennifer didn't say, and she purposely said that she doesn't talk about being vegetarian, but mainly plant-based. And as many of you have heard me talk about before, there's one book. If you want to live a long and vital life and be fully functional in your 80s, 90s, over 100 years old, fully functional, not sitting in some nursing home in a wheelchair, the one book you have to read is called The Blue Zones. because the blue zones or places in the world that have a large percentage of the population in their 80s and 90s, over 100, fully functional, living their everyday life. Higher percentages of those people. And we've heard of these places like Costa Rica and Sardinia, Okinawa, and they found a blue zone outside of Los Angeles. And the scientists went, what? What? Outside of LA, where if you run 10 kilometers, you breathe in enough particulate matter, it's the same as smoking a pack of cigarettes. That's living in Los Angeles, right? But there's a blue zone there, meaning large percentages of the people living into their 80s, 90s, over 100. And how's that possible? It was in Loma Linda, which is the home of the Seventh-day Adventists. Mm-hmm. And when scientists saw that, and they said, okay, what's similar with the people from Loma Linda, California, and Okinawa, and Sardinia, and Costa Rica? What's similar? And they found there were 9 things that were similar. And one of them is they ate mainly a plant-based diet, not exclusively a plant-based diet. Quite honestly, the sickest people I've seen in my career are vegetarians because they don't know how to do it correctly. There's nothing wrong with being vegetarian, but you really have to work at it if you're going to be vegetarian, to have a balanced, high protein, adequate balance of protein lifestyle, right? So I'm not against vegetarianism, but I always tell people you have to work really hard if you're going to do that. But all of us need to eat more plant-based. And then, of course, the quality of the plants comes into play. And so the organic and the things that Jennifer's proving on her farm, and the impact factor of what they're doing is so extremely high.
Yeah.
Jennifer, what is the vision of the work you're doing? How is this going to relate to Yvonne King, who commented that plants are also where our medicine comes from? How is what you're doing on your farm going to relate to the people who are watching here today?
So again, part of it is the education. Part of it is proving a model that more food like this is available. We talk about eating the rainbow a lot, which is that diversity. We also grow about 400 different crops on the farm. So it's a very biodiverse farm. And we turn that into, for us, our focus is getting into meal kits that can get to people that need a little bit more structure, a little bit more help on how to eat a healthy diet. Because it's, like you said, to eat mainly plant-based can be a little overwhelming at first for people. How do I get protein? There's so much protein in certain plants and legumes and things like that, if people know how to combine it in the right way. So that is the second part of our company, or it's a second company, but we have the two together, is a meal kitting company. And that's really trying to provide food that is focused on these longevity regions of the world. So it's called Nutrition for Longevity. And it's about combining that food in the right ways to mimic these regions in the world, because they practice regenerative farming in these locations. If you go to any of them, maybe with the exception of Loma Linda, but there's also some great organic farms in California as well that are doing a lot of these practices. But if you go to Nicoya, Costa Rica, if you go to Sardinia, if you go to Calabria, just a ways down from Sardinia, they are using regenerative agriculture. Some of their land has been practiced that way from the very beginning. They were never touched with chemicals. So we want to bring that into the US, who I think struggles, well, not just the US, we'd like to move globally as well, but really helping, like I said, create that food model from a farming standpoint, but also from an accessibility for the average person. So we want to be able to also create a food model that has an end game to it. So how can we start changing the way people eat food and make it readily accessible? Because like you said, it can be hard. We don't think eating healthy should be so difficult. It should be really easy to where you can go in a grocery store and have a really clean, healthy meal already prepared for you. That you can even go to restaurants in the future that they have that on the menu. We're trying to work with some restaurants to have like a longevity diet featured item, at least in New Jersey as a starting point, and then we move to other regions. So we just want it to be more accessible. It shouldn't be so hard to eat healthy. And I emphasize the US only because I lived in Switzerland and Germany, and I was shocked when I went into a grocery store in Germany and saw that they had an American aisle. And I was horrified when I went down and saw this is what Americans eat. And the whole rest of the store, this was just a normal grocery store, was very healthy, lots of diverse fruits and vegetables. Most of the store was actually the produce aisle, very little processed foods. And then I go, oh my gosh, the only processed food aisle is what they call the American section. But it was very eye-opening to me that we have a very broken, in my opinion, food model.
Yes.
And that's
Yes.
what we're trying to change, is creating, something that's a movement, because it's not just about me and my farm and my company. It's about showing a model that other people can replicate, that we can get this healthy food readily accessible to everyone. We're starting in the US just because that's where we're located, but we want to spread that across the world, because it is, even if you go to some of these longevity regions and you talk to the farmers there and you talk to the locals, they're actually fairly devastated, because they said, unfortunately, we're not going to have centenarians here in the next 20, 30 years, because our next generation isn't continuing. There's fast food chains popping up even in some of these little villages that now have tourism because they're longevity regions. And it's changing now. They're even struggling to maintain that. So we have to make sure we make it across the board accessible.
Marzi and I spent our honeymoon in Nagoya in Costa Rica, in the blue zone there. And I looked a lot. We're there for 6 weeks. And, I can work anywhere as long as I have an internet. And so it's a funny story. Some of you here have heard me say this before. I read 93 research papers on the blood-brain barrier during our honeymoon. And it was great. We had a wonderful time. And the result was there's a new blood test out now that looks at the blood-brain barrier like never before. It's a very accurate and comprehensive test. But that's when we were in the Nagoya Peninsula of Costa Rica. And I was shocked to see the restaurants in town that were busy. It was Kentucky Fried Chicken. And they've got sit-down areas in there, and they're just almost standing room only every time we drive by. And so the younger generation, most of them are not following in the same principles as their grandparents were.
Yeah.
Mary has a question. Is there a website you know of to search for regenerative farms locally?
I am not sure. So I could probably provide a link later. There's a few doctors that are starting to really promote this, but I'm not aware of a comprehensive one that you could really go to and see this in a very easy way.
Okay.
I think there's a little bit more on organic. I would say most of the farms by me are doing some portions of regenerative farming, maybe just not all of the pillars of regenerative farming. But maybe we can share that in a link as a follow-up.
Okay.
Yeah,
And the next question is from Debbie. She says, I just got a plot in an organic community garden. I have no idea the condition of the soil. Is there a test you recommend? How do I know what the soil needs?
Yeah, so general soil testing, you can have done at pretty much any of the larger universities. I don't know if she's in the US. And you can send in a baggie of your sample. They have instructions, like we have Rutgers University down the street. We actually do our soil sampling through them. And we do it multiple times to kind of see how we progress. So it's great to do it before you start working in the soil and then the end of the season. Because I think one of the most rewarding things when you do regenerative agriculture is how incredibly regenerative nature is. You can see an incredible life in the soil. Some of the more advanced testing where you can actually look at the diversity of the microbiome in your soil is extremely expensive. It's not yet mainstream. So that can cost you several $1,000s. So I would say just get a standard soil sample test. You can get that at a university. You can also look up a USDA office by you. They all offer low cost soil testing, and it'll tell you what your soil organic matter is, which is actually the number one basically indicator if your soil's healthy or not, because that's most conventional farming has kind of stripped a lot of the soil. So you see it usually in that number. That's what we look at as a number one. That's also your regenerative capacity is so as an example, in the US, it used to be at about 11% soil organic matter in our farmland. It's now about 1.5%. And that's why they say we only have about 60 cycles left, because we have hardly any actual soil left. So it'll tell you that. It'll tell you all the macronutrients basically, and then some of them will give you also micronutrients. So that's what I would recommend as a starting point, and then you can kind of see what you're starting with. Like I said, I don't do a lot of soil amending, because usually it's kind of, if I add potassium, I'm throwing things off, and I'm probably going to have to then throw magnesium in, or some other amendment, because I start throwing off the balance. I really try to use compost mainly. So if you have access to your own compost bin, or anyone around you, or a farm, I would say start with some good compost. It'll start building up your organic matter very quickly, and it'll start helping you create that microbiome. So that's one of the fastest ways that you can start to regenerate that.
Let's talk about the longevity diet and the food packages, the concept that you're putting together.
Yeah. So the longevity diet, again, was designed by Dr. Valter Longo. So he spent 30 years of his life researching these longevity regions of the world. So finding out where people live the longest, healthiest lives. And that's where he came up with some pillars of longevity that he's focused on. And that's where we actually partnered with L-Nutra, the company he founded, to use the longevity diet as our foundation of our meal kits, because I really believe it's looked at the best that we can find out there, from the way that the food is typically farmed in those areas. So it really starts from the soil, and then what kind of combinations of foods. And again, it's mainly plant-based or pescatarian, but even the pescatarian diet's mainly plant-based, but it's the way they combined it. They get the right sources of protein. They get the right types of foods. They cook them in a certain way that they're good for your microbiome. So that's what we tried to roll into our meal kits, or what we have rolled into our meal kits. So we combined right now breakfast, lunch, and dinners. We offer a gluten-free, vegan, and pescatarian offering. We do some guidance on intermittent fasting for people that are interested. And again, that's just our focus on making this food accessible and doing a lot of the work on the calories and the macros, because I think a lot of people struggle with having to think about that every day. So we want to make it ultra convenient so people can consume the right combinations of these food. Almost every dish has at least 5 colors in it. We really try to get the diversity of the phytonutrients in different aspects of the food. And make sure that we have those combinations, and that people get their balanced protein, carbs, and fats in a healthy way.
And how do people find these foods, these packages?
So you can go on nutritionforlongevity.com. So that's our website. It tells a little bit about our story of how we got started. And then you can see what offerings we have. We're really excited to be soon launching a double serve offering, so families can start consuming it. We just launched last year, so we're still creating new offerings. Last year we launched the gluten-free, so we're 100% gluten-free now with all of our offerings, thanks to a lot of your guidance. So just understanding that this is such a deep need across the globe for people with just a lot of challenges, I think, because of a lot of the food that we eat and the impact on our gut microbiome. And we're going to be launching a diabetes-friendly meal kit very soon. And we've already launched an intermittent fasting one, which is really just giving guidance on circadian rhythm, time-restricted eating, which we see a lot of health benefits with. So you can go on the website, check out the different varieties that we're offering, and yeah, learning a little bit about.
That's marvelous. That's marvelous.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the intermittent fasting concept.
Okay.
And how you've taken that concept and applied it to food selections and timing. Yeah.
So the main thing we focus on is the timing, because a lot of people, because we have constant access to food pretty much everywhere across the globe, people are eating very late in the evenings. So with the circadian rhythm, time restricted feeding, it's about getting on at least a 12-12 cycle, which helps a lot of people with sleep. getting their body back into a natural pattern. Even your microbiome has a circadian rhythm to it. So a lot of people have lost that balance. So we focus very much not on just what you eat, but when you eat it. So there's a few key aspects of that. One is to stop eating 3 to 4 hours before you go to bed. So your body can actually go into a resting state and isn't like doing the early stages of digestion as you try to go into a sleeping state. And then it's when you wake up, then you've already pretty much hit that 12-hour cycle and you can start to eat again. And then we try to have people eat between 3.5 to 4 hours, every 3.5 to 4 hours. So you're getting a consistent amount of food, the right amount of calories. We also try to keep the carb load and everything very balanced so you don't spike your blood sugar. So throughout the day, you have this very steady nutrient load that you're putting in your body. And then again, you're stopping that 3 to 4 hours before you go to bed. So we see it, and there's more and more studies coming out on the health benefits of that for all different disease states even. So I won't get into that, but I think there's just more and more showing that also the longevity regions all practice forms of fasting, and the most common one is intermittent fasting. So again, we focus on what's worked in those regions, what's so special about them, and it's not just what they eat, it's when they eat as well.
So for everyone that's listening, the first thing is the timing of food eating, the timing of your foods. That is most important in terms of keeping your metabolism more balanced. And what does that mean? It means burning more fat, storing more muscle, so that we don't gain a spare tire around our midsection. That's one of the things that is helped by having at least 3 to 4 hours of not eating before you go to sleep. And then when you sleep for 7 or 8 hours, now you're at 10, 11 hours since your last meal. Then you get up, you go to the bathroom, take a shower, get ready for the day, go make something to eat. Now you're 12 hours since your last meal. Not hard to do, as long as you don't eat at night. That's the first thing. And the results to that type of fasting, intermittent fasting, the 12-12 concept, is marvelous for your body. Your microbiome changes, your metabolism changes, your vitality changes, your energy changes. And there's a program called ProLon, which comes from the parent company that sponsored Jennifer's company, Professor Longo's company. And ProLon is a 5-day intermittent fasting approach that has dramatic results. I've done this, and Marzi and I are going to do it again now in a couple of weeks. And it's like you jumpstart your metabolism when you do this again. You kind of bring it back into balance. It's called ProLon. It's a great concept. And then you continue with at least a 12-12. One of the goals that I talk about with some people, if it's not too hard in their lifestyle, is an 8-16, meaning eating all your food within 8 hours. So many people can do this if their metabolism has a high baseline of function, and they're not too roller coaster. You might start with 12-12, and then you go to 13-11, and then 14-10. You'll find out what works for your body in terms of how much time do you give it, how much of a break do you give it between meals. And I think it's an extremely important concept as we move forward as a society in getting healthier, is that we re-educate ourselves on our food timing. Of course, the quality of the food, but then the timing of the food.
Absolutely. And that's, again, why I emphasize the research that Longo did, because it was on these longevity regions, and all of them practice some sort of fasting, and both intermittent fasting and then periodic fasting, which is the longer, once you go past 3 days, the regenerative capability for your body is just much higher. And that's what ProLon is it's that 5-day fasting mimicking, which mimics a periodic fast. It mimics the same thing as a water fast, which most people can't make it through a water fast. So you're actually fasting with some level of food, but it doesn't kick your body out of a fasting state. And then the intermittent fasting is really, it's maintenance. It's how our bodies were naturally designed to work. So I think when people hear fasting, it's very scary. It's going to be, something that's very difficult to do. But a circadian rhythm fast is very, very simple. Like you said, it's just stopping eating at a certain time, waking up, rolling into your day and eating breakfast. And then with ProLon, you have this very easy way now to get the health benefits of a water fast, but with food, so you don't have all the side effects and discomfort. So it's wonderful. It's why I did partner with L-Nutra, because there's such their research and their science that backs their products, I think, are incredible. And if you want to look at Dr. Longo's work, he has TED Talks. There's different speaking and papers all around his research, and it's very remarkable how much he's brought the eating and the feeding and the fasting into the limelight.
Yes. And his book is called The Longevity Diet. That's one of his books. He may have more. And this thing about ProLon, I did ProLon, and you've got, I think it's five different times of day you're feeding yourself something, but the amino acid structure of these foods is such that your body thinks it's getting the benefits of fasting in there, even though you're eating, and so you're not craving a lot of food. And I was a little bit hungry, but it wasn't hard at all to do it. My body thought it was fasting, and by day 3 of that, we now know from the science that your body starts making more stem cells. And if some of you have heard of a ketogenic diet, your body goes into ketosis here in a safe way, a very safe way, because you're still eating things. And you start making more stem cells, which means younger, healthier, more vital cells start being produced. And the results for everyone are just tremendous across the board. We'll put a link in here to the ProLon program for anyone that's interested in giving it a try. I highly recommend it. I think it's a critical component to introducing people to the whole world of detoxing and cleaning the crud out of your body, that this kind of prepares you for it. Not kind of, it does. It prepares you for it in a way so it's less traumatic on your body. I think it's just a fabulous thing to do. And I'll be talking about it a lot more in the future. Yeah. And it's Professor Longo and the L-Nutra company that saw what Jennifer's about here and said, we want to get behind this. We want to produce these farms, to support these farms that bring the highest quality food with the regenerative soil concept, which can help save the planet. So it's a win-win across the board. I mean, that's shocking. The average was 11% of our soil is full of microbiome, and now we're down to just over 1%. That's really shocking. And we all need, if we do this much in the direction of change here, which means go to the local garden store, get some little pots and some soil, organic soil, and get some parsley, get some basil, and put them in your windowsill. Just get started. Just get started with a little thing and watch where it goes from here.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Jennifer, any other aspects of what you folks are doing that you want to make sure that we know about here?
No, I mean, I think we hit quite a few of them. No, and I think, like you mentioned, ProLon is what started it for me. I do ProLon every 3 to 4 months, just as a reset, and I absolutely love it. So we kind of designed our diet initially to be something that follows ProLon, but obviously you don't have to. They can also be separate, but I do think it's an important part also with food as medicine. I think that's really the foundation of my belief, of the belief of the leadership at L-Nutra and Dr. Longo, is that we can do so much more with food as medicine. And I think we have to, because we certainly can't continue with the cost increases of healthcare year over year. It's just not sustainable. So we have to start doing things in a different way.
Fully agree. Fully agree. There's a shout out here from Nutrition for Longevity. They say, hello from the N4L crew. Well, hello, crew. And thank you so much for what you're doing. You guys are modeling what we hope the entire planet can listen and take heed to and start reproducing all over the world. So for all of you out there in Peru and Argentina and Scotland and England and Poland and in the US, please take this little bit of information you've gotten today, kind of digest it a little bit, take a look at ProLon. We'll post the site here. Take a look at Jennifer's site and see what her food packages are and support this. Give this much effort to it to support it. Go buy some seeds and get some organic soil, put them in the windowsill, just get something going. Just start like this. And 2-3 years from now, you may be like this, right? You may have a garden plot in your local community. Who knows how it'll grow, but get started just with something so that we all can save the planet in our own way. Jennifer, thank you so much for being with us today. It's really a pleasure to share this time with you.
Thank you, Dr. Ron.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for joining us. And we'll see you next week.
Thanks everyone. Bye-bye.